The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is more than a movie. It's a nightmare rooted in real horror. Behind the mask of Leatherface lies a twisted story inspired by true events. This is the shocking truth you've never heard. The sun was melting into the scorched flatlands of central Texas, painting the scrubland in hues of rust and blood. The wind dragged across the gravel and barbed wire, like the breath of something old and watching. In the heat haze, a decaying farmhouse loomed on the horizon, its white paint now the color of bone, its windows like black eyes. But long before that place became a symbol of American horror, before Leatherface roared to life with his revving chainsaw and stitched-together mask, there was another house, far north, buried in the wooded wastes of Wisconsin, and a man who would unknowingly become the myth that horror writers couldn't resist. His name was Ed Gein. And what he did in the quiet town of Plainfield in the 1950s would echo all the way to Texas. Gein wasn't a large man. He wasn't fast or particularly strong. In fact, he was nearly invisible in his community, polite, soft-spoken, a little strange, but nothing alarming in a town where strangeness was part of the landscape. He lived alone after his mother died, just him and the silence of the farmhouse that he refused to let anyone enter. The curtains were always drawn, the doors always locked. What happened inside was whispered in the margins of police reports and hushed gossip long after the house was torn down. They found body parts. Not just one body, but many. Skulls mounted like trophies. Skin turned into lampshades and seat covers. Breasts used as coin purses. Human faces flayed from the dead and worn like masks. It was more than murder. It was art and madness. The furniture of a grave robber with surgical precision. A man who wanted to become his mother, piece by piece, stitch by stitch. But he wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. Ed Gein never set foot in Texas. He never touched a chainsaw. But when a 1970s Austin filmmaker named Tobe Hooper read the headlines and stared too long into the flickering static of a department store's chainsaw display, something clicked. The idea of human skin masks, the collapse of rural America, and the dark heart of forgotten highways fused into one nightmare. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The film wasn't just fiction. It was folklore disguised in documentary clothing. Hooper opened the movie with a crawl of words. What you are about to see is true. It wasn't, exactly, but it felt true. And that was more terrifying. Still, while Gein was the initial spark, there are those who say the story went deeper. That the bones of Texas had their own darkness buried beneath them. That Leatherface wasn't just cinema. That somewhere, on the edge of civilization, someone had taken Gein's madness and turned it into a family tradition. That's what drove Amelia Harper to investigate. She was a journalist from Austin, just 31, with a taste for ghost towns and gasoline stations that didn't appear on maps. She'd grown up watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, both repulsed and fascinated by its raw energy. It didn't feel like a movie. It felt like a documentary with a fever. She knew Gein had inspired it, but she always wondered, why Texas? Why not set it in Wisconsin, where Gein had actually lived? She'd heard stories. Rumors that Hooper himself had once spent a summer driving through rural Texas, listening to backwoods legends and strange disappearances. That the bones of the story weren't just Gein's, they were Texan, buried in fields and forgotten sheds, in old police files gone missing or sealed off with bureaucratic tape. Amelia wanted to know the truth. She wanted to find the line between fiction and fact, and if possible, erase it entirely. Her first stop was a town called Childress, just off Highway 287. It was quiet, the kind of place where time felt frozen just long enough for you to wonder if you'd stepped off the edge of reality. Old men stared from rocking chairs outside shuttered storefronts. The diner's coffee was still a quarter if you knew the waitress's name. And the local sheriff, Harlan McCree, wore his hat like it had been inherited from the ghost of a real lawman. "I suppose you're here about the massacre," McCree said when she introduced herself. His voice was a dry rasp, like sandpaper over a casket lid. Amelia raised an eyebrow. "You mean the movie?" He shook his head slowly. "I mean the one that wasn't a movie. The one we don't talk about." That's when she knew she'd found something. According to McCree, back in the late 60s, before the film, before the legend, there was a family living out near Hollister Road, just past the county line. Nobody really knew their names. They moved in after the war and kept to themselves. Some folks called them the Sawyers. Others just called them. They bought up an old slaughterhouse and converted it into what they claimed was a meat processing facility. But the town butcher swore they never bought a single animal from him. The cattle ranchers said the same. No one ever saw livestock delivered. No smoke from the smokehouse. No smell of barbecue, even though the sign said family meats in chipped red paint. Then people started disappearing. Drifters at first. Hitchhikers. Runaways. A young couple from Dallas whose car was found on the edge of a field with the doors open and the keys still in the ignition. The sheriff at the time, a man named Dwyer, started asking questions. And then, in July of 1969, he vanished too. McCree was just a deputy then. He remembered going out there once, answering a call about strange noises in the woods. What he found, he wouldn't describe. Just said it was wrong. Said he left his badge and sidearm in the field and drove back to town in silence. That was the last official visit to the Sawyer property. Amelia asked him if any files existed. He laughed. "Files? Sweetheart, that family didn't leave behind paperwork. They left behind bones." It took weeks, but Amelia kept digging. County archives, old newspapers, forgotten case files buried under tax records and mislabeled boxes. One night, in a dusty courthouse attic in Wheeler County, she found a film reel. Unmarked. It crackled when played. No sound. Just grainy footage of a walkthrough, possibly by a crime scene photographer, of what looked like a farmhouse's interior. Tables made of ribbed bones. A couch upholstered in human skin. A wind chime made from teeth. A man's face, peeled and nailed to a door like a greeting. There was a flash of a woman's hand in the frame, gloved and trembling. And then the tape cut. The farmhouse was real. It had been demolished sometime in the early 1970s, just before Hooper's film began shooting, oddly enough. The land was sold at auction. No buyer listed. No permit records for destruction. Amelia started to wonder, what if Tobe Hooper had seen this footage? What if someone had shown it to him under the table, away from cameras and lawsuits? Or worse, what if someone from that family had survived, fled, and sold the story as fiction? The question wasn't, did the massacre happen? The question was, is it still happening? And as Amelia followed the trail deeper into the back roads of Texas, she found that the scars of the past never really healed. They just festered under new skin. The road narrowed as Amelia Harper left the main highway behind, the tires of her rental crunching over loose gravel and dirt. She hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. The map she was following was hand-drawn, copied from a yellowed sheriff's notebook she convinced McCree to let her photograph. It wasn't online. It wasn't official. But it marked something the others didn't. A property on the edge of nowhere, labeled only as S1. By now, she knew what that meant. Sawyer 1. The deeper she drove, the stranger the land became. Trees clawed upward, their branches like skeletal fingers against a dull red sky. Rusted windmills stood motionless in abandoned fields. Fences lined with animal bones cast jagged shadows across the grass. There was no cell service, no signs of life, only the sound of cicadas screaming like sirens in the heat. Finally, the trees broke, and she saw it. What was left of the house stood crooked and half swallowed by vines. The roof sagged inward like a broken spine. Its white paint had rotted away, exposing warped wood beneath. A swing hung motionless from the porch beam, still attached, still waiting. The place was a ghost, but it hadn't forgotten how to breathe. She could feel it exhaling, slow and heavy, as she stepped out of the car. She moved slowly, her boots crunching over debris and scattered bones she didn't want to look at too closely. The door was ajar. She pushed it open with one hand and stepped into darkness. It took her eyes a moment to adjust. The air inside was thick, suffocating, like it had been trapped for decades. The smell was wrong. Not rot, but age. Something bitter and metallic. Dust floated through beams of sunlight leaking through the holes in the roof. The wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips. On the floor lay a child's shoe, decades old, and next to it, a broken Polaroid camera. She raised her own phone, turned on the flashlight, and moved further in. The living room was frozen in time. A table stood in the center, covered in yellowing newspapers and cracked porcelain. The couch sagged, its stuffing spilling from one side, but what disturbed her was the armrest, stitched leather, far too pale, with small pores. It didn't look like cowhide. She found stairs, but didn't trust them. Instead, she followed the narrow hallway toward the back of the house. The kitchen was a horror museum. Hooks hung from the ceiling. A meat cleaver was embedded in the cutting board. Something dried and black was smeared along the refrigerator door. Inside, she found only rusted shelves and glass jars. One of them still held something floating, small, gray, human. A finger. The basement door was hidden beneath a mat. It creaked open with a reluctant groan. The stairs down were slick with moisture. She held the flashlight high, breathing shallowly, as the beam swept over the room below. That's when she saw the wall. It wasn't a wall in the traditional sense. It was a structure, like a shrine, made from bones. Some animal, some not. Human skulls stared back at her from within the arrangement, wedged between rib cages and long, thin femurs. At the center, beneath a yellowed spotlight, was a chair made entirely of human remains. Leather stretched over its frame like upholstery. The stitching was crude, the design deliberate. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. And then she saw the photograph. It was tacked to a beam with a rusted nail. Black and white. It showed a man, tall, broad, face obscured by a mask made of stitched flesh. He stood beside the chair like he was proud of it, like it was his masterpiece. In the corner, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were 3 words. "He still watches." She backed away slowly, heart racing, and nearly tripped over a toolbox lying at the edge of the room. It fell open with a clatter. Inside were surgical instruments, bone saws, scalpels, pliers, all stained, all real. She turned and ran, bolting up the stairs and out of the house, not stopping until she was back at her car. But she wasn't alone. Someone had left footprints in the dust near her car, fresh ones. Big, bare. They led to the side of the house and vanished into the brush. She got in, locked the doors, and drove. Fast. But as she stared into the mirror, a shape flickered through the trees behind her. For a moment, just a moment, she saw the figure. Large, masked, holding something long and mechanical in his hands. The chainsaw didn't start. Not yet. But the sound of it was in her bones now, rumbling just beneath the surface of her thoughts. Back in Austin, Amelia did what she promised she wouldn't. She went to Tobe Hooper's estate. The director had died years ago, but his personal archive had been donated to a film school. Boxes of notes, scripts, photos. Among them, tucked inside a folder labeled Research, she found a photocopy of the same map from McCree's notebook and a photograph of a chair made of bones. The caption read, Sawyer set, actual. She froze. The movie hadn't recreated the set. The movie had used it. That meant one thing. Someone had taken her there, showed him the house, opened the basement, told him the story. She scoured the production notes until she found a name listed under local contacts, Virgil H. Sawyer. No one had mentioned that name before. It wasn't in the credits. It wasn't in the thank yous. It was a ghost. And if a Sawyer was alive in the 1970s, helping the filmmakers, who's to say one wasn't still alive now? Amelia Harper didn't sleep that night. She sat in the motel room with the door latched, a chair braced beneath the knob, and the blinds drawn tight. Her phone lay beside her, flashlight app still glowing, though the battery had long since dipped below 30%. On the nightstand, she kept a photograph of the bone chair under the beam labeled Sawyer set, actual, and the name she couldn't stop reading, Virgil H. Sawyer. She searched public records for hours. Property deeds, birth certificates, obituaries, anything that might tie the name to a real person. And there it was, a birth record from 1941, registered in Bosque County, Texas. No death certificate. No gravestone. She cross-referenced it with census data. In 1950, there were 3 people listed in the Sawyer household: Edward Sawyer, his wife Louise, and their son Virgil. After that, the trail went cold. The family vanished off official records, like smoke into the wind. No taxes filed. No school enrollments. Not even a police report. It was as if they'd become ghosts. But then, in the archives of an old Austin film magazine, Amelia found something strange. An interview from 1973 with Tobe Hooper, just before the film's release. In it, the interviewer asked if the house they used was built for the movie or a real location. Hooper had smiled, avoiding the question, and said only, "Sometimes, the best fiction is just pointing a camera at the right place and walking away." She called the magazine. The editor who had taken that interview, Robert Lang, was retired, but still alive. He agreed to meet. They sat in a greasy spoon diner on the edge of the city, cicadas screaming through the open windows. Robert was old, pushing 80, his hands shaking as he stirred cream into his coffee. He hadn't talked about that story in years, he said. Not since the first time someone tried to break into his house to steal the original tape of the interview. Said it was worth something. Amelia leaned in. Did Tobe Hooper ever talk about a man named Virgil Sawyer? Lang hesitated. His spoon clattered into the saucer. He didn't have to. The man was there, on set, always off camera, watching. Big guy. Quiet. The crew called him the farmer. Said he was just there to help wrangle equipment, but he never touched anything. Just stood around. Sometimes he'd laugh at the wrong moments. Didn't blink much. He looked around the diner like someone might be listening. One night, after a shoot, I followed him. I don't know why. Just curiosity, maybe. He walked out into the woods with a lantern and a bucket. I didn't get too close, but I saw him lower something into a pit. Couldn't see what, but it was heavy. He didn't come out for almost an hour. Lang sipped his coffee. Next day, one of the extras didn't show up. Amelia felt a chill slide down her spine. Did you tell anyone? No, Lang said. And you shouldn't either. Some stories dig back. They come looking. She left the diner with the address he scrawled on a napkin. Not of the pit, but of a man who might know more. A man who worked on the film's production as a local scout. His name was Ray Burnell. According to Lang, Ray was the one who introduced Hooper to the house in the first place. Ray lived in a trailer on the edge of Blanco, Texas, surrounded by rusting trucks and coils of barbed wire. A line of deer skulls decorated the fence like sentries. His front door was covered in old news clippings, yellowed articles about the movie, missing persons posters, and an Austin Chronicle headline that read, "Hooper's House of Horrors, Fact or Fiction?" Ray answered the door shirtless, holding a rifle and chewing on a toothpick. His eyes were sunburned and sharp. "You're another one of them, ain't you?" he said, not kindly. "I'm a journalist," Amelia said. "I'm writing a story about the film. About the Sawyers." Ray's jaw twitched. For a second, she thought he might slam the door, but instead, he stepped aside. "Then you better come in before it gets dark." Inside, the trailer was a hoarder's cathedral. Piles of VHS tapes, maps, Polaroids, deer bones, and what looked like an entire cow's rib cage suspended from the ceiling. He poured her a drink of something strong and brown, and sat down in a recliner surrounded by shotguns. "You ever been out there?" he asked. Amelia nodded. "To the house. It's still there." He laughed hollow. "No, that house was never the real one. That's just the skin. You didn't go deep enough." She blinked. "What do you mean?" Ray leaned forward. "You ever heard of Burnt Tongue Creek?" She shook her head. "It's west of Hollister. Middle of nowhere. Forest so thick, birds fly around it. The real house, the original, was there. Not the farmhouse from the movie. That was a shell. The real one? It's underground." He pulled out a torn photo, a tunnel entrance, barely visible in the brush. "We called it the mouth." According to Ray, before the Sawyers were ever the Sawyers, there was another name, the Hewitt family. He said it like it tasted bad. They'd lived out there in the 1930s, even before the Dust Bowl. Rumor said they were cannibals, but no one could prove it. Every so often, someone would go missing, and no one investigated. There was no point. By the 1950s, they'd supposedly died off in a house fire, but Ray didn't believe it. Said some of them had moved underground. "Tunnels," he whispered. "Miles of them. Dug out by hand. Bone reinforcements. Smoke holes hidden in the trees." They didn't just vanish. They went deeper, and they took people with them. Amelia stared at the photo, the edges curling from age. "Are the Sawyers the same family?" Ray nodded slowly. "Different name. Same blood." And then he said something that made her blood freeze. "I saw Virgil last year, outside my trailer, just standing there in the dark. Same damn apron. Same stitched face. Just watching." Amelia took the photo, thanked him, and left. But she didn't go back to her motel. She drove straight to Burnt Tongue Creek. It wasn't on any GPS. But she found it, marked by a rusted cattle gate and a path that looked more like a scar across the earth. She parked, grabbed her flashlight and recorder, and made her way in. The woods were unnatural. Silent. No wind. No birds. Just the crunch of her boots over fallen leaves and the soft thud of something unseen moving just behind her. Never close, but never far. She found the tunnel just as Ray had described. It was low, almost hidden by moss, and a collapsed root system. The entrance was reinforced with wooden beams, blackened by time. She crouched, switched on her flashlight, and crawled inside. The tunnel swallowed the light. Within minutes, the path forked. She marked the walls with chalk as she went, winding deeper and deeper, the air growing colder, damper. She began to notice things embedded in the walls. Bones, old shoes, the rusted skeleton of a child's bicycle. Then she saw the writing. It was carved into the stone with something sharp. Words scratched over each other in layers. They never left. Meet his memory. Virgil waits. She kept walking. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber, and what she saw there nearly made her scream. A kitchen, fully functional. Stove, table, blood-stained aprons, meat hooks. Someone had been living here recently. A jar of pickles sat open on the counter. A pan still held grease. And on the wall, hung neatly on iron nails, were faces. Not masks. Faces. One of them was fresh. That's when she heard it. The low, rumbling roar of an engine. It wasn't close, but it was moving, and it was getting louder. The sound grew louder, bouncing off the bone walls of the underground chamber, swallowing her breath and replacing it with pure animal panic. Amelia didn't think. She moved. Her flashlight beam jittered as she bolted back toward the tunnel she'd entered through, slipping on slick patches of moisture and raw dirt. The roar echoed behind her, mechanical and hungry, the kind of sound that didn't just promise death, it promised desecration. She had only seconds to choose a direction. The tunnel forked again. She took the left, her boots sliding on a bend, shoulders scraping the wall. She heard something behind her. Footsteps, not fast but steady, deliberate. Like whoever, or whatever, it was, didn't need to hurry. It already knew the tunnels. It knew she wouldn't make it out. Amelia dropped the recorder, not noticing. Her backpack snagged on a nail. She ripped free and kept going, heart in her throat. Finally, she saw a sliver of light, daylight, barely visible through a grate in the earth. She scrambled up a small incline, fingers digging into the dirt, and shoved her shoulder against the hatch. It didn't budge. She screamed and pounded on the metal, then felt the vibrations. The sound had stopped. Silence. Then breathing. Behind her. She turned, trembling, and saw only the tunnel. No chainsaw. No man. Just a single glove, large, torn, covered in something black, resting gently on the dirt like it had been set there for her to find. Then a whisper. You saw the kitchen. She didn't wait to hear more. She backed down the slope, turned, and found a narrow shaft she hadn't noticed before. She squeezed through, belly to the floor, rocks cutting her ribs, until she spilled out onto leaves and light. She was outside. The sun was setting over Burnt Tongue Creek, and for a moment, the world felt like it was spinning backwards. She stumbled to her feet, panting, the trees swaying in the windless air. She ran for the car. When she got to the gravel road, the vehicle was gone. She froze. Her bag had the keys, but her car wasn't where she left it. Not a trace. No tire marks. No broken glass. Just a deer skull hanging from a branch where her rearview mirror had been, swinging gently. Amelia walked for hours. It was past midnight when she reached the highway. A trucker picked her up without asking questions. She was covered in dirt, blood from shallow cuts, her eyes wide and distant. He dropped her in Johnson City at a gas station where the lights buzzed like insects. She called McCree. The old sheriff didn't sound surprised. You found it, didn't you? He said quietly. I found them, she replied. They're not gone. The house was never the end. It's alive underground. There's tunnels, chambers, a whole system. There's faces. McCree was silent for a long time. Then he said, We tried to bury it once. That was the deal. As long as nobody looked too deep, they'd stay down there. But you dug. I have proof, she said. Photos. Audio. footage. Then you better burn it. I'm not going to bury the truth. You think this is about the truth? McCree's voice turned sharp. It's about survival. Amelia didn't sleep the night either. She holed up in a motel with boarded windows, checked the locks 3 times, and backed up everything she had onto a cloud server under a false name. She uploaded the tunnel photos, the shrine, the face wall, the glove, all of it. She emailed it to 5 journalists she trusted. Only 2 replied. One asked if she was feeling all right. The other simply said, "This looks like a hoax." Well crafted, though. The next day, her recorder was mailed to her motel in a plain envelope. No return address. She hadn't told anyone where she'd lost it. The audio was intact, at first. Her breath, her footsteps, her whispered thoughts as she moved through the tunnels. Then, halfway through the file, another voice, low, gurgling, like it came from a throat that had never properly learned speech. "You came to our table. You don't leave hungry." A click. Then the unmistakable whine of a chainsaw starting. She dropped her phone. That was when she remembered the photo. The old one in the courthouse archive. The one that showed the bone chair and the masked man beside it. She dug it back out and looked closer. There was a detail she'd missed. On the wall behind the chair was a family portrait. 5 people. 1 tall man in the back with a bandaged face. 3 seated adults. 1 child. The child was smiling. She zoomed in. The child's name tag said Virgil, but it wasn't the same masked man in the basement. That meant Virgil wasn't the monster. Virgil had become him. And that raised the worst question of all. If he was once a child in that house, what else had been passed down to him? What lessons? What rituals? This wasn't just one man. It was a family business. Generations. And maybe the movie wasn't just inspired by the Sawyers. Maybe the Sawyers wanted the movie made. Maybe it was a message. Or worse, a recruiting video. She remembered something Lang had said in the diner. Some stories dig back. They come looking. She didn't believe it then. She did now. Because on her motel room wall, just above the dresser, there was a new photograph. It hadn't been there yesterday. It showed her, standing at the tunnel mouth, flashlight raised, mouth open in horror. In the corner of the photo, out of focus, was the masked man. Watching, waiting, behind her. The motel manager swore he hadn't seen anyone come or go. "You sure you didn't bring that photo yourself?" he asked, scratching the back of his neck. Amelia didn't respond. She was already on her second coffee, her eyes glassy, staring through him. The picture lay flat on the counter between them. She didn't need to say anything else. Someone had been in her room, and they had taken her picture inside the tunnel. That was the part that made her stomach turn. She'd been alone. She had been sure of it. Unless someone had been behind her the entire time. She left the motel that afternoon and headed south to San Marcos, where one of the 2 journalists who responded to her email, Deshaun Ellis, taught a course on media theory at the local university. He'd written a thesis about horror cinema and its connection to suppressed regional trauma. She thought he might understand. And more importantly, he might help her publish. She arrived during office hours. He was a tall man with tired eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. When she showed him the unedited photos and the audio recording, he didn't scoff. He didn't dismiss her. He closed the blinds and locked the door. Then he said, "You know there are stories about this, right? That the Texas Chainsaw Massacre wasn't just inspired by real events, it was part of them. Or rather, an extension. A container." She looked at him. "A container for what?" He pulled a manila folder from his filing cabinet. Inside were copies of old police reports. Some Amelia had never seen. A 1968 case from a small town called Rockwood. A missing persons file for a group of 3 teenagers. Their car had been found abandoned at the edge of the woods. The seats were stained. Inside the trunk, a single object, a butcher's apron embroidered with a single initial V. "What happened to them?" she asked. "No one knows. The case disappeared. The sheriff who filed it retired 2 days later. Moved to Nevada. Never gave a statement." Amelia leafed through the documents, her pulse quickening. The handwriting on the report looked familiar. She pulled her phone and compared it to the scrawl on the wall inside the tunnel. "Virgil waits." The handwriting was the same. She looked up. What if Virgil's not the last one? Deshaun shook his head. I don't think he was ever alone. He opened another folder, this one with newspaper clippings dating back to 1942. Fires, disappearances, whole families vanishing. Crops going to seed. A pattern of rural decay that coincided with every supposed death of the family line. "What if they don't just live underground?" Deshaun said. "What if they infiltrate towns, pretending to be part of the population until someone gets curious?" She thought of Sheriff McCree. He'd known. Maybe he'd always known. Amelia looked down at her hands. They were shaking. "I can't stop now," Deshaun sighed. "Then let me show you something." He led her across campus to the archives beneath the library. It was cold down there, the hum of old machinery echoing in the concrete halls. In the back, he unlocked a narrow case and pulled out a film reel. This was sent anonymously in 1975. No return address, no sound. It was delivered in a box marked with the same symbol that was etched on the floor of the tunnel. A crude cattle skull with excess for eyes. He threaded the reel into a projector and dimmed the lights. The footage played in silence. It was grainy, black and white. A handheld camera moved through a house, but this wasn't the same one from the movie set. This was older, real. The furniture was minimal. The walls were raw wood. Hooks dangled from the ceiling, swaying as though something had just been pulled from them. Then came a face, or what had once been one, nailed to a door. Stitched, shrunken, eyeless. The camera kept moving. It stopped on a child, maybe 10 or 11 years old. He sat in a high-backed chair, motionless, expressionless. Behind him stood a man with a leather mask and a cleaver in one hand. The man raised the cleaver and placed it gently on the boy's shoulder. The boy didn't flinch. Then the screen went black. Amelia stood frozen. "Was that?" Deshaun nodded. "Virgil, as a child." They were training him. She staggered back. "It's not just murder. It's culture. Ritual. Something older. Generational violence," Deshaun said. "Embedded in blood. Passed like a trade." Amelia packed up her things and left San Marcos that night, heading east toward Rockwood. She had one last lead, an abandoned church listed in the town records as once belonging to the Free Apostolic Order of the Divine Table. A fringe sect with no known surviving members. The name struck her. The table, as in, "You came to our table," the voice had said in the tunnel. She arrived at dawn. The church was half collapsed, shrouded in mist. Ivy crept over its rotting facade, and the stained glass had long since shattered. She stepped inside with her flashlight sweeping across the pulpit. There were no pews, only butcher blocks. The altar was a slab of stone with drains carved into the corners. Below it, in place of a Bible, was a book, bound in leather. She opened it. Inside were names. Hundreds. Some crossed out, others marked with the symbol of the cattle skull. Each name had a note beside it. Useful. Tender. Liar. Screamed too loud. One name wasn't crossed out. Hers. Harper Amelia. Walking meat. She dropped the book. Something creaked above her. In the rafters, a figure. Large. Watching. She turned and ran, sprinting into the trees behind the church, heart pounding, lungs burning. The sun had just broken the horizon, but the forest didn't feel warm. It felt hollow, like it had been gutted long ago. Her car was half a mile away. She didn't make it. A trap sprang from the ground. Rope, nails, teeth. She fell hard, pain exploding in her ankle. And from the trees came a sound she'd hoped she'd never hear again. The chainsaw. This time it wasn't distant. It was close, and growing louder. The teeth of the trap had sunk deep into her ankle, metal and bone grinding together. Blood soaked her sock, warm and fast. Amelia tried to pull free, but the trap didn't budge. It was welded to something buried beneath the dirt, something permanent. And the chainsaw was getting closer. It wasn't revving yet. It was idling, growling, like it was thinking. She fumbled for her phone. No signal. Of course not. Not here. Not now. The only thing she could do was hide. Amelia reached for a broken branch and jammed it into the trap spring mechanism. It took 3 tries, but the hinge finally groaned open with a snap. She pulled her leg out, gritting her teeth against the pain, and crawled through the brush, dragging her injured foot behind her. The trees parted just enough to give her a view of the church. That's when she saw him. Virgil Sawyer. There was no mistaking him now. He stood over the altar, head tilted, arms smeared with something dark. The mask he wore was different from the one in the photos. This one was new, fresher. It clung to his face in wet patches, the seam still raw, as if it hadn't fully dried. In his hand was the saw. He didn't rev it. He didn't need to. He turned his head, slowly, sniffed the air. He knew she was there. Amelia crawled backward through the underbrush, biting her tongue to keep from screaming. She didn't run. She couldn't run. But she could crawl. And that's what she did for almost an hour, through thorns and stones and stagnant creeks, until she found a drainage tunnel beneath the road. She pulled herself into the darkness and passed out. She woke up to headlights. A pickup had stopped near the tunnel mouth. A figure jumped out. Not Virgil. Not masked. It was Deshawn. He helped her into the truck, wrapped her ankle with strips of his shirt, and drove. They didn't speak for a long time. When they reached town, Amelia finally asked, "How did you find me?" He didn't look at her. "I've been followed too." She turned. "What?" He nodded slowly. "Ever since we played that reel. I think they watch anyone who gets close. And I think they let us live as long as we stay scared. But we're past that now." He handed her a file. It was a map. A top-down satellite image showing the region around Rockwood. It was marked with dozens of tiny red X's. Each X was a missing person. "All within a 20-mile radius of Burnt Tongue Creek," he said. "All since 1951. But the Sawyers were supposed to be gone by then," she whispered. "No." That was the story. The truth is, the family didn't disappear. They expanded, like a fungus. They moved outward, set roots in nearby towns, changed names, married into new lines. He opened another folder. Photos. McCree, the motel manager, the pastor from the church registry, even Ray Burnell. All connected, all somehow involved. "They don't just live in the woods anymore," Deshawn said. "They walk among us." That night, they made a plan. Not to run. Not to publish. But to go back, burn it all down. Amelia still had the map she copied from the courthouse archives, the one marked S1 through S6. Sites believed to be original Sawyer properties, abandoned or erased. She and Deshawn traced the lines. They formed a shape, a star, and in the center was an unlabeled plot of land, owned by a shell corporation, purchased in 1973, the same year the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was filmed. They drove through the night, armed with flare guns, knives, fuel tanks, and a single shotgun they didn't know how to use. They passed through towns that felt hollow, gas stations where the clerks didn't blink, motels with curtains that moved before they rang the bell. Everywhere they went, someone was watching. Finally, they reached the site. It was a field, empty at first glance. But in the center, half covered by grass and roots, was a door. Not a house. Not a building. Just a door. Metal. Bolted. No lock. Amelia pulled it open. The stench hit them like a wave. Old blood, earth, something rotting beneath layers of time. A stairwell led down, deeper than the tunnel system she'd explored before. This wasn't just a cellar. This was an entrance. To what? She was about to find out. They descended. The walls were smoother here, lined with tile. The structure wasn't improvised. It had been built, funded, supported, as if someone wanted it to last. They reached a large chamber. Inside were tables, operating tables, freezers, and cameras, not digital, film, set up like a studio. Lights, microphones, a rack of masks, each tagged with names and dates. In the corner, an old projector still whirred. They turned it on. The film began, and they watched. It was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but not the version that made it to theaters. This one was longer, raw, unedited. There were scenes that weren't fiction, real screams, real people, begging, pleading, dying. The film blurred the line until the line vanished. The movie was the massacre, or maybe it had always been. "Holy God," Deshawn whispered. Then the lights flickered, and the projector died. The room fell silent, and from behind the metal door upstairs came the sound they dreaded most. The chainsaw, no longer thinking, now hunting. The roar of the chainsaw shattered the silence, louder than it had ever been. It wasn't just noise. It was a declaration, a war cry. It echoed down the stairwell and through the metal corridors of the underground facility like a siren announcing Judgment Day. Amelia and Deshawn froze. They were in the center of something not meant to be found. Not just a lair, a shrine, a theater, a place where pain had been recorded like performance. The old projector sputtered once more, casting a final flicker on the concrete wall before dying forever. The room went dark. Then another light turned on. Fluorescent, harsh, overhead, as if someone had thrown a switch from somewhere deeper in the structure. Someone who was watching. They had walked into a trap. Deshawn grabbed the shotgun. Amelia took the flare gun and the gas canister. Her ankle screamed with every step, but she pushed through. There was no more running. They had to end this. They moved through the corridor, passing racks of stained butcher aprons and drawers full of facial molds, some latex, some flesh. There were files, dozens of them, labeled with years: 1974, 1986, 1990, 2003, 2006, 2022. Each year matched a Texas Chainsaw film. Each one had notes, casting lists, kill counts, locations. They weren't just movies. They were reconstructions. Every sequel was a retelling, a ritual, a reenactment designed to keep the memory alive, to feed something. It wasn't just about death. It was about storytelling. Blood as folklore, screams as scripture. The hallway ended in a wide, circular chamber, a dome. The walls were polished bone, carved into reliefs, scenes from the films and from real events. The original chainsaw victims strung up like cattle. The dinner table scene, the hammer, the meat hook, and in the center of the room, Virgil. He stood beneath a massive chandelier made of spinal columns and ribs, the saw in one hand, a butcher's mallet in the other. His face was a tapestry of human skin, stitched carefully to allow expression. The eyes behind it were full of fire. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood others, 4 figures, all masked, all silent. Family, not just descendants, new blood. Amelia understood then. Virgil hadn't been the last. He'd been the bridge, the torchbearer. And now there were successors, raised beneath his hand, trained beneath his saw. Deshawn raised the shotgun. Virgil didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped aside, and the smallest of the masked figures approached, holding a camera. They were filming this. Amelia's voice shook. This is what you wanted all along. For people to see you, to fear you. You used the movies to stay alive. The chainsaw growled to life. Virgil walked forward, slow and deliberate. Amelia lit the flare. The red light filled the chamber. Deshawn fired. The blast hit one of the masked figures, who crumpled instantly, but the others didn't react. They just advanced. Silent, unblinking. The chainsaw screamed. Amelia hurled the flare at the base of the bone chandelier and sprayed gas across the floor. Flames caught instantly, racing along the ribs, licking the walls. Screams erupted. Not from her, not from Deshawn, but from somewhere beneath the floor, like the fire had awakened something old and buried. Virgil roared. Not with fear, with joy. He raised the saw and charged. Deshawn fired again, missed. The saw ripped through the air between them, catching his arm. Blood splashed the wall. He fell back, screaming, as Amelia raised the flare gun and fired. The flare hit Virgil in the chest. He stumbled, staggered, but didn't fall. He burned, and he smiled. The flame spread to the ceiling. The bone chandelier crashed to the ground. Screams rose all around them as Amelia grabbed Deshawn and pulled him toward a side corridor. The smoke was thick, choking. Behind them, Virgil burned. But he didn't scream. He watched until the ceiling collapsed. They ran. They found a metal door at the end of the corridor, old, rusted. Amelia slammed her shoulder into it once, twice, 3 times, and it finally gave. They stumbled into the dawn. Outside. Alive. They didn't stop running until they reached the road. A van stopped for them. A woman stepped out, covering her mouth when she saw the blood, the burns, the shotgun. Amelia said nothing. She just handed the woman the folder she'd taken from the facility. Get this to the media, she whispered. Get it everywhere. The van roared off. She and Deshawn collapsed on the side of the road, coughing, broken, but not dead. The fire raged behind them, smoke rising like a signal. For the first time, Amelia thought it might actually be over. But 2 weeks later, a video surfaced online. Grainy, handheld, a masked figure walking through a burning tunnel, holding a charred chainsaw. The caption, "The table is set." It was quickly taken down, but not before it was copied, and not before it was shared. And just like that, the cycle began again. Because the truth about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre wasn't just about murder. It was about memory. It was about myth. And myth never dies. It just finds a new mask. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre wasn't just a movie. It was a warning. A legacy of violence and horror buried deep in Texas soil, passed down through generations, hiding behind a mask of myth and blood. Amelia and Deshawn uncovered the truth, but the story didn't end. The saw still roars in the dark, waiting. Because some families never die. They just wait for the next chapter. If you're ever out there, down a lonely road, listen closely. You might just hear it, the chainsaws growl. And that's when you run.